Just getting started here planting out at the neighbor's property. So right now I'm looking at the northeast corner of our property and did a little planting in here. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Yesterday I went through and dropped some hay bales just kind of strategically along the line, knowing that we're going to want to mulch as we plant. Everything we're putting in will be bare root, and soon enough we'll have both Sasha and I digging and planting. We can set up a camera and show you how we do that, but I'll just talk about some of the planting that was done. We're going to stage hay bales all the way down the line and across. If we had access to mountains of wood chips right now, we would use that. If someone had a big pile of manure they wanted to drop off, we would use that. But luckily, we had some friends, Dawn and Kelly, thank you so much, that were coming by to pick up plants, and they brought hay bales, dumped them in our driveway, and so we're using what we've got. As I mentioned in the previous video, my thought was to focus first and foremost on establishing some layers that can provide some privacy and shelter from this road. Normally I describe this as a busy road, but one of the side benefits of everything shutting down is it's quiet right now. You can actually hear the water rushing. And so what I'm doing is playing first with the idea of bridging, creating some continuity between our two landscapes. So I dug up some raspberries from a patch that we had. You can see little tufts of hay. So this is just on the north of our miscanthus grass. And so they'll create a little bit of a cane layer in here. And it's a summer and fall bearing raspberry. And they're just randomly dotted because we have a thick patch of them. We didn't have to buy them. And so I'm just popping them in all over. Raspberries are a great filler plant. You can see I bop just down the line. I might continue that for a bit. They shoot up quickly. They're apt to sucker and fill out, so they put up some good competition with grass, and they can create a pretty fast understory. We can always whack them down later if need be, but the idea is that it kind of invites a flow of harvest from their spot over to ours and back. And who knows, maybe in the future folks walking down the road would need some raspberries and they can harvest from this little contiguous hedgerow too. So initial first sketch with the raspberries, they can be filled, mowed, cut as needed. So then looking at the start of some of the more long-term elements. And the thing about this whole project is we're not planting with the idea of being precious about things. So this is a black walnut that showed up in our garden 2 years ago, and we just let it grow. It wasn't in the way. And so now what I'm going through is digging out some plants that are high value, beautiful plants that can fit the niches in here, and starting with them closer down to the road. So this will be a combination of visual barrier, ideally some yield for folks in the future, but also chop and drop and that kind of thing. So black walnut, keystone, you might say, well, why black walnut? That's jug loan and all that. But we're down here by the road where the cooler, wetter spots coming through. It's a good, appropriate spot for black walnut. And we could tuck in a pawpaw or 2 or 3 or 4, or even like a mulberry if we wanted to pulse and cut them back and forth. So we're putting that in for now as a fast, tree, keystone tree right there. Smaller, but there's English walnut and another English walnut, both that will over time reach up and fill into this canopy. So we've got our alders here, which can be chopped and dropped, and they'll be this summer cut back to let more light into the understory future succession and used as a mulch to feed them. And likewise, I've put in some redbud. Same picture here as the black walnut. They were showing up as weeds, air quote, in our garden. Let them grow for a year or two and then dig them up and find nice uses for them. And these are another early succession, very fast growing, beautiful shrub tree that is very malleable. So we can cut as they get in the way of the driveway, or if they cast too much shade on the next layer below them, and use them as fodder to feed the other elements. The key with this sort of design is to not go for that precious, keystone tree and then 25 or 50 feet away another keystone tree. It's to really fill it in, get it feral and packed and moving towards that fungal dominant scenario, with the idea that certain members will be chomped down and fed to others, and it'll simplify over time. If that whole spiel felt a little too complex or heady, I wouldn't overthink it, just like I don't overthink it. Really, the theme of it is as much as you can plant as close as possible, as much species diversity generally translates to the most resilience and the most options in the future. I'm walking along the road here and realizing there's a note I can offer. You might say too, as a response, well, it's all well and good. You can afford to put tons of trees and shrubs all next to each other. You're a nursery. Well, you could be your own nursery in some ways too. So if I walk down the street here, I can see, this is where it pays to start learning about more plants. Here's a seedling apple growing, nice 6-foot tall tree that could be dug out of this wild spot, maybe in the woods. Maybe there's a carpet of little hickories or oaks near where you live. In fact, here's a shagbark hickory. If somebody was willing, we could dig that out and put that as a keystone. Another apple. Maybe there are thickets of autumn olives or wild grapes, wild raspberries, feral mint in the ditches. The whole world can be a nursery. In fact, just in this little area, I see another black walnut. I see a whole bunch more shagbark hickories. There are all these spruces if we needed a windbreak or a year-round visual barrier. Carpets of little apples here or there that could be planted as wild apples and grafted later, and all sorts of other members in there. All could be planted without any fuss, without any feeling of being precious, and either cut back later, grafted over, used to feed animals, used as firewood, but just filling the space, moving it up into succession. You can see part of the reason why I would go with black walnut and English walnut with our planting is when I look at the places, this is right next door in this woods that nobody's really managing here. Black walnut and hickory are the trees that pop up on their own quite a bit. So nature is telling me that if I can go into the juglans realm right in this particular microclimate down near the road, they ought to do really well because nature's wildly planting them in. The apples tell me a story as well, that as we move further up this line, we could probably get away with some apples in here because it matches the context that nature's showing me right nearby. So we're only a few feet in. We've got about 5 or 6 trees. We've got some raspberries planted. I put a whole bunch of cuttings, we'll look at those later on, between my neighbor's home and the other neighbor to give him some visual barrier. There's a mix of willow, poplar, and elders. Tomorrow we move into the black currants, into the shadier nooks in here, and think about some production avenues. Maybe it's actually planted in grids or lines so it's easier to manage and harvest. And then we'll look at the sunny areas a little bit down the line. As time allows, I'll keep staging mulch around, and we're not worrying about pH tests or fertility tests. It's just digging holes, getting the plants in the ground, mulching them so that we protect them from frost, from drying, and also to mark where we have planted. And we can always come back in a week or a month or 2 months with compost and also consider the herbaceous support layers. So the mints, the alliums, the lupins, all the other elements we might want, those can happen later. The taller elements can go in first while they're asleep, and the details can come in later. So none of this has to be fully designed first, and none of it has to be fully filled with all of the particular layers. But trees and shrubs tend to want to be going in first. Thanks for watching.